My arrogant new boss fired me to give my job to his unqualified lackey, ignoring the fact that I was the only person certified to monitor the sub-zero freezers holding $12 million in medical supplies. He laughed and told me operators just follow orders. So, I packed my desk and let the federal regulations spring a trap that would completely destroy his career. At exactly 4:30 a.m., the heavy steel door of freezer unit Alpha sealed shut behind me with a loud, mechanical thud. Instantly, the ambient noise of the bustling warehouse was replaced by the deafening, rhythmic hum of industrial compressors. At -80 degrees Celsius, the cold doesn't just chill you. It bites through your thick, insulated thermal layers and actively tries to crack your bones. Frost formed on my eyelashes within seconds, but I barely noticed. For 15 years, this brutal, freezing environment had been my domain. My name is Maya Hill, and as the senior cold chain specialist at Apex Distribution, keeping these massive freezers operating perfectly wasn't just my job, it was my obsession. I held a specialized, personal federal certification that allowed me to monitor, calibrate, and secure Class A medical shipments. This morning, my clipboard held the manifest for our most critical inventory yet, a brand new $12 million shipment of highly fragile mRNA vaccines. These vials required absolute temperature stability. A fluctuation of even 3 degrees for more than 20 minutes would render the entire batch completely useless, turning life-saving medicine into expensive glass garbage. I carefully checked the primary digital thermostat, tapping the glass screen with my gloved finger. It read a perfect -80.2 degrees. I logged the time, signed my initials, and stepped out through the airlock, welcoming the relative warmth of the 50-degree loading dock. As I pulled off my heavy thermal hood, Luis Mendoza, our veteran forklift operator, drove past. He lowered his forks with practiced precision, setting down a massive pallet of insulated packing materials. "Morning, Maya," Luis called out over the noise of a reversing truck. "Unit Alpha holding steady." "Like a rock, Luis," I replied, giving him a thumbs up. "Just keep those loading bay doors closed as much as possible. I don't want any ambient humidity messing with the external sensors." "You got it, boss," he smiled warmly. Just then, the heavy double doors leading to the administrative offices flew open. Samira Jones, the warehouse floor manager, hurried toward me. Her usually calm demeanor was entirely gone. She clutched a digital tablet tightly to her chest, her eyes darting nervously toward the front entrance. "Maya, he's here," Samira said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The new regional director of logistics. He pulled up 10 minutes ago." I sighed, clicking my pen shut. Luke Green, the guy corporate sent to trim the fat and boost quarterly profits. "Exactly," Samira nodded, looking terrified. "He's already complained about the coffee in the break room and yelled at the night shift security guard. He brought someone with him, too, a young kid. Maya, be careful. He's looking at the energy expenditure reports for your freezers." Before I could respond, the warehouse doors opened again. A man in his early 40s strode onto the concrete floor, wearing a tailored, charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my entire car. His leather dress shoes clicked sharply against the pavement. He looked around the dusty, hard-working environment with a deeply ingrained expression of utter disgust. This was Luke Green. Trailing closely behind him was a young man in his 20s, wearing clean, uncreased khakis and holding a brand-new clipboard. I didn't know it yet, but the clock had just started ticking on a catastrophe that would shake the very foundation of this company. I tucked my manifest under my arm and stood my ground as the new director marched directly toward my prized freezers. By 9:15 a.m., the warehouse was in full swing, but the usual rhythm of forklifts and scanning machines was interrupted by Luke Green's imposing presence. He stood right outside Freezer Unit Alpha, shivering slightly in his expensive suit, staring at the digital energy readouts mounted on the wall. Beside him, the young man in khakis was vigorously taking notes, though he looked entirely confused by the flashing dials. "Maya Hill, correct?" Luke asked, not even bothering to make eye contact as I approached. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the digital display. Explain to me why Unit Alpha is pulling double the kilowatts of our standard frozen food sectors. Good morning, Mr. Green, I said calmly, maintaining a professional tone. Unit Alpha is currently holding $12 million worth of mRNA vaccines. The federal mandate requires us to keep the temperature strictly at -80 degrees Celsius. Standard frozen food is held at -20. The energy pull is necessary to maintain the integrity of the medicine. Luke finally turned to look at me, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. Medicine is just a product, Maya, and this facility's energy bill is astronomical. Corporate has tasked me with reducing operational costs by 20% across the board. He gestured to the young man beside him. This is Cooper. He's my nephew, and he will be taking over the newly created position of Floor Efficiency Manager. I've instructed him to raise the ambient temperature of all deep freeze units by 5 degrees. It will save the company thousands of dollars a week in compressor strain. I froze, staring at him in absolute disbelief. Mr. Green, you cannot do that. The temperature parameters are not suggestions. They are strict legal requirements set by the pharmaceutical client and the federal government. If those vaccines rise above -75 degrees, they degrade. We will ruin the entire shipment. Cooper spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. I read online that most vaccines have a buffer zone. It should be fine for a few days. I turned my gaze to Cooper. Did you read that on a blog or in a federal compliance manual? Because my federal certification is attached to those logs. Every 4 hours, I manually verify the digital readings with a physical probe. You cannot touch that thermostat. Luke stepped closer to me, his arrogance radiating in the chilly air. He clearly despised being challenged by an employee in a high-visibility vest. Let's get one thing incredibly clear, Maya, Luke said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. I am the regional director. I dictate the protocols here. You are just an operator, and freezer operators follow orders. You will hand over the thermal system passwords to Cooper right now. We are bypassing your outdated manual checks. They waste too much overtime. Samira was standing a few yards away, pretending to check inventory, but I could see her hands shaking. She knew exactly what was at stake, but she desperately needed her job. I will not give Cooper the passwords, I said firmly, my voice echoing slightly in the loading bay. And I refuse to sign off on a directive that deliberately violates federal medical storage regulations. If you alter the thermostat, I will immediately report it to Dr. Aris, the lead client representative. Luke's eyes narrowed into small, furious slits. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, the smirk vanishing from his face. Is that a refusal to follow a direct managerial order? It is a refusal to break the law, I corrected him. Fine, Luke snapped, checking his gold wristwatch. Come to my office in 10 minutes, we are done here. At 11:30 a.m., I sat across from Luke Green in the glass-walled HR office overlooking the warehouse floor. Cooper sat in the corner, nervously tapping a pen against his knee. The tension in the small room was suffocating. Through the glass, I could see Lewis on his forklift, staring up at the office with deep concern. Luke slid a single piece of paper across the polished mahogany desk. The bold letters at the top read, "Notice of immediate termination." "You're firing me," I stated, feeling a strange mixture of shock and profound calm. "Gross insubordination," Luke replied smoothly, leaning back in his leather chair. "Apex Distribution does not employ individuals who refuse to adapt to modern, efficient business models. We are streamlining the cold chain division. Cooper is taking over your duties as of right now at half your bloated salary. Sign the paperwork and leave the premises." I looked at the termination paper, then looked back at Luke. I needed to be absolutely certain he understood what he was doing, not for his sake, but for my own ironclad defense. "Mr. Green," I started slowly, pronouncing every word with careful precision. "You need to understand something critical about this facility. Apex Distribution does not hold the Class A medical storage license on its own." "Save the lecture, Maya," Luke interrupted, rolling his eyes dismissively. The company owns the building, the company owns the freezers, and the company owns the contracts. You are entirely replaceable. I am the sole person in this building with an active federal temperature monitoring certification. I continued, refusing to be silenced. That certification is legally bound to my name, not the company's. It is the only thing licensing Unit Alpha to legally hold that $12 million shipment. If you fire me, my certification leaves with me. Luke let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Do you honestly think a warehouse worker holds the keys to a multi-million-dollar corporate contract? How arrogant can you be? Hand over your RFID security badge right now, Maya. He held out his hand, palm up. I stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. I had warned him. I had explicitly outlined the law. I had created the verbal record. He chose to ignore it out of sheer hubris and greed. Without another word, I unclipped the heavy plastic RFID badge from my belt and dropped it into his palm. My desk is mostly clear. I'll need a box for my personal items. Cooper will escort you out, Luke said, turning his attention to his computer monitor, already dismissing my existence entirely. 10 minutes later, I walked down the main aisle of the warehouse holding a small cardboard box containing my thermos, a framed photo of my dog, and my favorite pen. Samira rushed over, tears in her eyes. Maya, I am so sorry, she whispered frantically. I tried to tell corporate, but they won't listen to me. It's okay, Samira, I said softly, giving her a reassuring smile. Just document everything you see. Whatever you do, do not sign any temperature logs today. Louis stood by the loading dock doors, holding them open for me. He looked angry enough to punch a wall, but he stayed silent out of respect. I stepped out into the blazing midday sun. The sudden heat washed over me, a sharp contrast to the sub-zero world I had lived in for 15 years. As I walked to my car, I didn't feel defeated. I felt a cold, calculated sense of purpose. Luke Green thought he had just cut costs and asserted his dominance. He had no idea that the exact second he deactivated my badge, Apex Distribution started operating an illegal, unlicensed medical facility. The trap was set, and I was going to let him walk right into it. By 1:15 p.m., my little suburban house felt oppressively quiet. I sat at my worn kitchen table, my laptop open, staring at a blank wall. My phone was uncharacteristically silent. Usually, my entire day was dictated by automated text alerts from the freezers, ensuring the precious cargo was stable. Now, that responsibility rested entirely on Cooper's utterly incompetent shoulders. I pictured the warehouse floor. Luke Green was likely back in his luxurious office, smugly reviewing his projected quarterly bonuses, completely unaware of the ticking time bomb he had armed. The federal regulations for Class A medical storage are not mere suggestions. They are draconian, unyielding laws designed to protect public health. The mRNA vaccines inside Unit Alpha were suspended in a fragile state. The moment their environment changed, the degradation process would begin irreversibly. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the anxious chill from my bones. I needed a clear head. I picked up my phone and dialed Samira's personal number. I knew she was on her lunch break, away from Luke's prying eyes. Maya, Samira answered, her voice tight and barely a whisper. Are you okay? I'm fine, Samira, I said calmly. Tell me exactly what is happening on the floor right now. I need specifics. I heard a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. It's a disaster, Maya. 30 minutes after you left, Luke marched Cooper down to Unit Alpha. He demanded the password for the digital thermostat overrides from it, claiming you were hoarding company access. He stood right there in his suit and watched Cooper physically tap the screen. My stomach tightened. Did he raise the ambient temperature? He bumped the entire system up by 5 degrees, just like he threatened, Samira confirmed, panic creeping into her tone. He said the compressors were working too hard and costing the company a fortune in peak-hour electricity rates. He claimed the vaccines had a safety buffer and it would be fine. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. 5 degrees. The vaccines were certified at -80 degrees Celsius. A 5-degree increase over a sustained period of 12 hours would initiate microscopic structural failures in the mRNA lipid nanoparticles. The shipment wouldn't instantly spoil, but it would slowly, inevitably become completely inert. Samira, listen to me very carefully, I instructed, my voice sharp and authoritative. Do not, under any circumstances, touch that thermostat. Do not write your initials on the physical logs outside the door. And if Luke asks you to verify the temperature, you tell him you are not certified for medical cargo. I won't, she promised quickly. Maya, Lewis is furious. He's refusing to load any more standard frozen pallets near Unit Alpha because he doesn't want to be associated with that section of the warehouse right now. Lewis is smart, I replied, a small smile touching my lips. Keep your distance, Samira. Let Luke and Cooper own this entire situation. I hung up the phone and opened a fresh document on my laptop. I began meticulously typing out a detailed timeline of the morning's events, starting from Luke's arrival to the exact moment he revoked my security badge. I noted every threat, every specific order, and the presence of Cooper. This wasn't just a grievance anymore. This was the foundation of an explosive legal defense. Luke Green thought he was a corporate genius cutting overhead. He didn't realize that by raising that thermostat, he had just signed the death warrant for a $12 million medical contract. The temperature was rising in Unit Alpha, and soon, the heat would be entirely focused on him. 2 days later, at 10:00 a.m., my home office looked less like a relaxing sanctuary and more like a tactical war room. Stacks of printed emails, highlighted federal regulation manuals, and copies of my personal certification documents covered every inch of my desk. I sat in my ergonomic chair, sipping black coffee, carefully reviewing my employment contract with Apex Distribution for the 10th time. The silence of my house was a stark contrast to the chaotic hum of the distribution center I had left behind. But the silence was productive. I needed a flawless, impenetrable paper trail before the inevitable disaster struck. I opened my personal email archive and searched for the specific phrase, medical storage licensing agreement. For the last 15 years, I had renewed my federal monitoring certification independently, paying the hefty annual fees out of pocket because the previous management understood that my license was the only thing keeping the facility compliant. The company reimbursed me, but the name on the official document was firmly, legally, Maya Hill. I found the crucial PDF file from the Federal Health Logistics Board, dated just 3 months prior. It explicitly stated that the cold chain storage facility located at Apex Distribution's address was authorized to hold Class A medical supplies solely under the direct supervision of the certified individual named above. Perfect, I muttered to myself, printing 3 copies of the license. Next, I needed to solidify the timeline of my warnings to management regarding temperature fluctuations. Over the past year, I had sent several detailed emails to the corporate office, outlining the catastrophic risks of altering the freezer protocols to save energy. I dug through my sent folder, finding the most potent email from 6 months ago, addressed directly to the Vice President of Logistics, Luke Green's immediate superior. In that email, I had explicitly written, any attempt to raise the ambient temperature of freezer Unit Alpha to reduce electrical costs will result in the immediate and irreversible degradation of the stored medical assets. Furthermore, bypassing the certified manual checks violates our legal obligations to the client. The response I received had been a dismissive, single-sentence acknowledgement, but that was all I needed. It proved corporate was fully aware of the protocols long before Luke arrived. I collated these documents into a thick, red plastic folder. This was my shield. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated violently against the wood of my desk. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Dr. Eris, the lead client representative for the pharmaceutical company. He was a meticulous, brilliant scientist who trusted me implicitly with his multi-million-dollar creations. I let the phone ring twice before picking it up. "Hello, Dr. Eris," I answered smoothly. ensuring my tone was completely calm and professional. "Maya, good morning," Dr. Aris said, his voice clipped and businesslike. "I'm looking at the automated digital readouts from Unit Alpha. The temperature has been holding steady at -75 degrees for the past 48 hours. The parameters we agreed upon were strictly -80. He paused, and I could hear the subtle edge of concern creeping into his voice. "Is there a calibration issue with the sensors? I need you to go down there and verify the manual logs immediately. If those vials have been sitting at -75 for 2 days, we have a massive, massive problem." I closed my eyes for a brief second, feeling the weight of the moment. The trap had finally sprung. "Dr. Aris," I said slowly, "I cannot verify the manual logs for you." I was terminated by the new regional director, Luke Green, 2 days ago. There was a dead, heavy silence on the line. "What?" Dr. Aris finally whispered, the professional facade completely crumbling. "Terminated. Who is monitoring the shipment?" "A man named Cooper, Mr. Green's nephew," I replied, reading straight from my timeline document. "Mr. Green explicitly ordered the temperature raised to save on energy costs. I strongly advise you to contact him immediately. The facility is currently operating without a certified monitor." The line clicked dead. Dr. Aris had hung up. The storm was coming, and Luke Green had absolutely no umbrella. By 4:00 p.m. the following afternoon, my phone had transformed into a relentless, vibrating beacon of panic. I sat on my couch, a cup of tea cooling on the table, watching the missed call notifications pile up on the screen. The caller ID flashed repeatedly: Apex Logistics main office, followed by Luke Green's cell, and then a string of frantic, unknown numbers from the corporate headquarters. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I opened my voicemail app and pressed play on the first message, holding the phone away from my ear as Luke's voice filled the quiet room. "Maya, pick up the phone. This is Luke Green. There's a miscommunication happening with Dr. Aris regarding the vaccine shipment. He's threatening to pull the contract. I need you to come in and sign off on the manual temperature logs to calm him down. We can discuss your severance package if you cooperate. Call me back immediately." His tone was a pathetic mixture of arrogant demand and rising terror. He still thought he could command me, completely oblivious to the legal crater he had just stepped into. I deleted the message, saving it to my secure cloud drive first. The next voicemail was from 3 hours later. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a frantic, breathless panic. "Maya, please, you have to answer me. Dr. Aris just arrived at the facility with a team of independent auditors. They are demanding to see the federal certification for the facility, and HR says the license is in your name. You need to get down here right now. The entire $12 million shipment is showing signs of degradation. The company is going to lose everything. Call me." I smiled coldly at the ceiling. The reality of his actions was finally crashing down around him. He had raised the temperature, ruined the vaccines, and was now desperately trying to find a scapegoat. The third voicemail, left just 20 minutes ago, was the most satisfying of all. It was Luke. It was the vice president of logistics from corporate. "Ms. Hill, this is Richard Vance, VP of Operations. We have a catastrophic situation at the distribution center. Luke Green has informed me that you abandoned your post and maliciously altered the freezer settings before you left. We are preparing to involve local authorities and pursue legal action against you for industrial sabotage and the destruction of $12 million in medical assets. I suggest you contact our legal department immediately." My heart pounded, but not with fear. This was exactly what I had anticipated. Luke, entirely cornered by his own incompetence, was trying to pin the entire disaster on me. He was going to claim I sabotaged the freezers in an act of revenge. I stood up, grabbing my red plastic folder. I walked over to the large window overlooking my quiet street. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the driveway. It was time to stop playing defense. I picked up my phone and dialed the local police precinct, asking directly for Detective Carter. I had spoken to him years ago during a routine security audit of the facility. He was a sharp, no-nonsense investigator who handled corporate fraud and major property crimes. "Carter speaking," his gruff voice answered. "Detective Carter, this is Maya Hill," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "I need to formally report an attempt at massive corporate fraud and medical endangerment at the Apex Distribution Center. The regional director, Luke Green, is currently attempting to frame me for the destruction of a $12 million vaccine shipment that he personally ordered ruined." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. I have the federal certification documents, internal emails, and a timeline of events that prove he has been operating an unlicensed, illegal medical facility for the past 3 days. And detective, I have a witness. The trap was fully loaded. Now it was time to pull the trigger. At 9:00 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday morning, 3 days after I had walked out of the frozen warehouse for the last time, I sat in a brightly lit coffee shop downtown. The scent of roasted beans and warm pastries was a comforting backdrop to the serious business at hand. Across from me sat Detective Carter, out of uniform in a sharp blazer, his notepad already open on the small, round table. "So, Ms. Hill," Carter began, taking a sip of his dark roast. "You're alleging that Apex Distribution's new regional director, Luke Green, intentionally ordered the degradation of a $12 million medical shipment to save on electricity, and is now attempting to frame you for industrial sabotage to cover his tracks." "That is exactly what I am alleging, detective," I replied, sliding my thick, red plastic folder across the table. "And I have the documentation to prove it." Carter raised an eyebrow, opening the folder. He meticulously reviewed the printed emails, my federal certification, and the detailed timeline I had constructed. I watched his expression change from polite skepticism to hard, professional focus. "This certification," Carter said, tapping the document from the Federal Health Logistics Board. "It clearly states that the facility is only authorized to store Class A medical supplies under your direct, personal supervision. When you were terminated and your security badge revoked, the facility immediately lost its legal license to hold that specific cargo," I finished for him. "Luke Green assumed the company owned the license. He fired me to hire his unqualified nephew at half my salary, and in doing so, he has been operating an illegal medical storage facility for over 72 hours. Carter leaned back, whistling softly. "That's not just a breach of contract, Maya. That's a massive federal violation. If those vaccines were distributed after being compromised, the public health implications." "Exactly," I nodded firmly. "And he raised the ambient temperature of freezer unit alpha by 5 degrees to cut costs. The mRNA lipid nanoparticles have undoubtedly begun to degrade. The entire shipment is likely ruined." "You said you had a witness," Carter prompted, his pen hovering over his notepad. I pulled out my phone and dialed Samira's personal number. She answered on the second ring, her voice trembling. "Maya, is everything okay?" she asked nervously. "Samira, I'm sitting with Detective Carter from the local precinct," I explained gently but firmly. "I need you to tell him exactly what happened the morning I was fired. Specifically, what Luke Green ordered Cooper to do with the digital thermostats in Unit Alpha." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I knew she was terrified of losing her job, but I also knew she was fundamentally honest. He ordered Cooper to override the system." Samira's voice finally came through the speakerphone, shaky but clear. "Maya refused to raise the temperature because it violated federal law. After she was fired, Luke marched Cooper down there and had it bypass her security locks. He personally oversaw the temperature increase of 5 degrees. He said the vaccines had a safety buffer and it would save the company thousands." Carter scribbled furiously in his notebook. "Ms. Jones, this is Detective Carter. Can you confirm that Maya Hill did not touch the thermostats before she left the premises?" "I can absolutely confirm that," Samira replied, sounding a little more confident. "She never went back to Unit Alpha after the meeting in HR. She was escorted out immediately." Thank you, Samira. That's exactly what we needed, I said, ending the call. I looked back at Detective Carter. The arsenal was fully assembled. The paper trail, the federal regulations, and the eyewitness testimony were airtight. All right, Maya, Carter said, closing the red folder and sliding it back to me. I'm going to contact the federal regulators and the client, Dr. Eris. This has escalated beyond local corporate fraud. Luke Green is about to have a very, very bad day. I smiled, picking up my coffee. The trap was locked. All that was left was to spring it publicly and devastatingly. By 2:00 p.m. the next afternoon, the situation at Apex Distribution had completely spiraled out of Luke Green's control. I was sitting in my living room when my phone rang. It was an unrecognized number, but the prefix belonged to Washington, D.C. I answered cautiously. Maya Hill. A crisp, authoritative voice asked. This is Special Agent Vance with the Federal Health Logistics Board. Yes, Agent Vance. I've been expecting your call, I replied, sitting up straight. We received a tip from a Detective Carter regarding a critical compliance failure at the Apex facility, Vance stated, his tone strictly business. We have also been contacted by Dr. Eris, who is claiming the entire vaccine shipment has been compromised due to unauthorized temperature fluctuations. That is correct, I confirmed. I was terminated on Tuesday morning by the new regional director, Luke Green, for refusing his direct order to raise the temperature in Freezer Unit Alpha to save on electrical costs. I informed him that my personal certification was the only thing licensing the facility, but he dismissed me and had me escorted off the premises. I could hear Vance typing rapidly on the other end. MS. Hill, we have pulled the digital logs from the facility remotely. The ambient temperature was raised 5 degrees at 1:15 p.m. on Tuesday and has remained there since. Furthermore, we have confirmed that the facility's Class A license is indeed registered solely under your name. So, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, the facility has been operating illegally for 3 days. Exactly, Vance said, his voice dropping slightly. This is an egregious violation of federal law. We are dispatching a full audit team to the facility within the hour. The entire shipment will be seized and tested for degradation. I need you to be available for a formal deposition tomorrow. I will be fully available, Agent Vance, I assured him. I have all my documentation ready. I hung up the phone and walked into my kitchen, pouring a fresh glass of water. The sheer scale of Luke's arrogance was finally meeting the unyielding wall of federal regulation. He had tried to play corporate games with highly sensitive, federally mandated public health protocols. An hour later, I received a frantic text from Lewis, my friend on the warehouse floor. Maya, it's absolute chaos here. 4 black SUVs just pulled up to the loading dock. Men in windbreakers with federal badges are swarming the place. They've locked down Unit Alpha and are demanding to see the facility's license. Luke is screaming at HR in his office. Cooper is crying by the forklift. What did you do? I typed back a simple reply. I just followed the rules, Lewis. Let the regulators do their job. Stay away from Luke. I sat at my kitchen table, picturing the scene. Luke Green, in his expensive suit, finally realizing that his corporate title meant absolutely nothing to federal agents investigating the illegal storage of $12 million in medical supplies. The power dynamic had violently shifted, and he was completely, utterly powerless. The phone rang again. This time, it was the vice president of logistics from corporate headquarters, Richard Vance. The same man who had left the threatening voicemail accusing me of sabotage. Maya, Richard's voice was strained, the arrogance entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, placating tone. We need you to come to the regional headquarters immediately. The feds are tearing the distribution center apart. They are claiming we don't have a valid license. That's because you don't, Mr. Vance, I said smoothly, enjoying every second of his panic. As I informed Mr. Green before he fired me, the license is registered to me personally. The moment you revoked my badge, you broke the law. Listen to me, Richard pleaded. We can fix this. We can reinstate you with back pay, a promotion, whatever you want. Just tell the feds it was an administrative error and that you are still supervising the facility." "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice cold as ice, "I am not an employee of Apex Distribution. I will not lie to federal agents to cover up Mr. Green's illegal orders. And if you attempt to contact me again to solicit perjury, I will add that to my report. Have your legal team contact Detective Carter." I ended the call and blocked his number. The empire was crumbling, and I was holding the sledgehammer. On Thursday morning at 10:00 a.m., I walked into the sleek, glass-enclosed boardroom of Apex Distribution's regional headquarters. The room smelled of expensive leather and sheer panic. I was not there as an employee, but as a subpoenaed witness for the preliminary federal inquiry. Sitting at the massive mahogany table were several high-ranking corporate executives, looking pale and exhausted. Richard Vance, the VP of Logistics, was sweating visibly through his expensive shirt. Dr. Aris sat rigidly at the far end, his face a mask of cold fury. Next to him was Special Agent Vance from the Federal Health Logistics Board, looking incredibly severe. And then there was Luke Green. He sat slumped in his chair, his usually perfectly styled hair looking slightly disheveled. He glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred as I took my seat next to Detective Carter. Cooper was nowhere to be seen. He had likely been told to stay far away. "Let's begin," Agent Vance stated, opening a thick file. "We are here to address the catastrophic failure of the cold chain protocols at the main distribution center, resulting in the complete degradation of a $12 million mRNA vaccine shipment." Dr. Aris leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. "Our independent laboratory tested the vials seized yesterday. The 5-degree temperature increase ordered by Mr. Green irreversibly destroyed the lipid nanoparticles. The entire shipment is completely inert. It is garbage, and my company will be seeking full financial restitution from Apex Distribution." The executives at the table visibly winced. $12 million was a massive hit, and the loss of the pharmaceutical contract would be devastating to their quarterly profits. Luke suddenly slammed his hands on the table, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She did this. Maya Hill deliberately sabotaged the digital thermostats before she left. She was angry about being terminated, and she altered the settings to ruin the company." The room went dead silent. Luke looked around, expecting the executives to rally behind his desperate lie. Instead, they stared at him in horrified disbelief. Agent Vance slowly picked up a document from his file. "Mr. Green, we have subpoenaed the internal IT logs for the facility. The digital overrides for Freezer Unit Alpha were accessed at 1:15 p.m. on Tuesday, 2 hours after Ms. Hill was escorted from the premises. The password used belonged to your nephew, Cooper." Luke's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "Furthermore," Agent Vance continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "we have sworn testimony from the warehouse floor manager, Samira Jones, stating that she personally witnessed you ordering Cooper to raise the temperature by 5 degrees to save on electrical costs, despite MS. Hill explicitly warning you that doing so violated federal law." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, watching Luke's career evaporate in real time. "But the most egregious violation," Agent Vance said, turning his cold gaze entirely onto the corporate executives, "is the fact that this facility has been operating an unlicensed medical storage facility for 3 days." He held up a copy of my federal certification. "This document clearly states that the license is bound to Maya Hill personally. When you terminated her and revoked her access, you lost the legal right to hold that shipment. You have committed massive federal fraud." Richard Vance rubbed his temples, looking like he was going to be sick. "Agent Vance, we were unaware that the license was personal. Mr. Green assured us he was merely streamlining operations." "Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Mr. Vance," the federal agent replied sharply. "Apex Distribution is facing millions in fines, the loss of its operational licenses, and potential criminal charges for medical endangerment. As for Mr. Green, Agent Vance turned back to Luke, who was now staring blankly at the polished wood of the table, completely ruined. Mr. Green, you are personally liable for the intentional destruction of the shipment, as well as the federal violations. Detective Carter has informed me that local authorities are currently preparing warrants for your arrest on charges of corporate fraud and reckless endangerment. The ambush was complete. Luke Green, the arrogant director who thought freezer operators just followed orders, had just been completely, utterly destroyed by the very regulations he had so arrogantly dismissed. At 1:30 p.m., the boardroom had emptied except for myself, Detective Carter, and Agent Vance. The corporate executives had practically sprinted out, their faces pale, desperately whispering into their cell phones, no doubt scrambling their legal teams. Luke Green had been escorted out by two of Agent Vance's men, his arrogant swagger completely erased, replaced by the hollow stare of a man whose entire life had just violently imploded. I remained seated, the red plastic folder resting calmly in front of me. I felt a profound sense of closure, but the absolute confirmation of the life twist was about to be officially documented. Agent Vance closed his thick file and looked across the mahogany table at me. His severe expression softened marginally, replaced by a look of professional respect. "Ms. Hill," Vance began, his tone less like an interrogator and more like a colleague. "I have reviewed your timeline, your emails to corporate regarding the temperature risks, and the explicit warning you gave Mr. Green regarding the federal certification." "I told him," I replied simply, my voice steady. "I told him exactly what would happen if he revoked my badge and raised the thermostat. He chose to ignore it because he believed a warehouse worker couldn't possibly hold a federal license critical to a multi-million-dollar contract." "His hubris is staggering," Carter added, leaning back in his chair. "He genuinely thought he could just fire you, hand the keys to his nephew, and pocket the energy savings." Agent Vance nodded slowly. "The trap you laid, Ms. Hill, it was entirely legal and entirely devastating. By allowing him to terminate you, you essentially forced Apex Distribution to operate an unlicensed Class A medical facility the very second you walked out the door." "I didn't lay a trap, Agent Vance," I corrected him firmly, ensuring my words were clearly understood for the record. "I followed federal regulations to the letter. When my employment was terminated and my access revoked, my legal capacity to monitor that facility ended. The law states the facility was then unlicensed. The subsequent destruction of the mRNA vaccines was the direct result of Mr. Green's unauthorized temperature adjustment." Vance smiled faintly. "Understood, Ms. Hill. Your actions were entirely compliant with federal mandates. In fact, your refusal to follow Mr. Green's illegal order and your immediate reporting of the violation to Detective Carter likely saved lives. Had those degraded vaccines been distributed, the public health consequences would have been catastrophic." He slid a formal document across the table. It was a preliminary clearance form from the Federal Health Logistics Board. "This document officially clears you of any wrongdoing regarding the degradation of the $12 million shipment," Vance explained. "It also confirms that your personal certification remains in excellent standing." I picked up the pen and signed my name with a steady hand. The weight of the past week finally began to lift off my shoulders. "What happens to Luke Green now?" I asked, handing the document back. Detective Carter answered, his voice grim. "He's facing multiple federal charges for medical endangerment and fraud. Because he acted outside the scope of his employment by violating federal law, Apex Distribution's corporate liability insurance will likely refuse to cover him. He is personally on the hook for the $12 million in damages to the pharmaceutical client, Dr. Eris. He is going to be completely bankrupted." "And Cooper?" I asked, almost feeling a twinge of pity for the unqualified kid. "Fired, obviously," Carter shrugged. "But since he was acting under direct orders from a superior, he'll likely avoid criminal charges. He's just a terrified witness now. Agent Vance stood up, extending his hand. Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Hill. Your meticulous record-keeping is the only reason this massive fraud was stopped so quickly. I shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Agent Vance. I was just doing my job. As I walked out of the regional headquarters and into the bright afternoon sun, I felt a deep, resonant satisfaction. The trap hadn't been an act of malicious sabotage. It had been the cold, unyielding reality of the law, perfectly executed against a man who believed he was above it. 6 weeks later, the fallout from the Unit Alpha incident had completely reshaped the landscape of Apex distribution. I sat in a comfortable booth at a diner near the warehouse, sipping a coffee across from Samira Jones and Luis Mendoza. The mood was dramatically lighter than the last time we had spoken. You should see the place, Maya, Luis laughed, shaking his head. It's a ghost town in the administrative offices, corporate completely cleaned house. Richard Vance, the VP of Logistics. Samira added, taking a bite of her toast. He was forced into early retirement. The board of directors held him accountable for not properly vetting Luke Green and for ignoring your emails about the temperature protocols. I smiled, taking a sip of my coffee. And what about the warehouse floor? Oh, it's night and day, Luis grinned broadly. They brought in a new regional director, a woman who actually worked her way up from the loading docks. First thing she did was reinstate the manual temperature checks and freeze all energy-saving initiatives in the cold chain division. And she gave us all a mandatory seminar on federal compliance, Samira noted, rolling her eyes playfully. It was boring, but at least we know she takes it seriously. The news regarding Luke Green had dominated the local business papers for weeks. As Detective Carter had predicted, Apex Distribution had entirely thrown him under the bus. They claimed his actions were a rogue, illegal directive that violated corporate policy, shielding the company from the brunt of the criminal charges, though they still faced massive federal fines. Luke, however, was facing utter ruin. Dr. Eris's pharmaceutical company had filed a devastating civil suit against him personally for the $12 million in destroyed vaccines. His assets were frozen, his expensive house was likely going to be seized, and he was currently awaiting trial on federal charges of medical endangerment. The arrogant man who had sneered at my boots and safety vest was now facing a very real, very long prison sentence. It's incredible, Maya, Samira said, looking at me with genuine admiration. You walked out of there without a word, and the entire empire crumbled behind you. It wasn't magic, Samira, I replied softly. It was just documentation and knowing the law. They thought they could cut corners on safety to boost their bonuses. They forgot that some rules exist for a reason. So, what's next for you? Luis asked, leaning forward. Are you going to look for another cold chain job? I looked out the diner window at the bright, warm afternoon. For 15 years, I had worked in a freezing box, protecting fragile medicines from a world that didn't understand the strict parameters required to keep them viable. I had loved the precision of it, but I was suddenly incredibly tired of the cold. Actually, I said, a genuine smile touching my eyes. Dr. Eris called me yesterday. His pharmaceutical company is building a massive new, state-of-the-art storage facility specifically for mRNA vaccines on the other side of the state. He offered me the position of Director of Compliance. Samira gasped, and Luis let out a loud cheer, slamming his hand on the table. Director, Luis beamed. That's incredible, Maya, you deserve it. It's a huge step up, I admitted. No more 4:30 a.m. shifts in the freezer. I'll be designing the protocols, overseeing the certifications, and making sure no arrogant regional manager ever touches a thermostat again. They'd be terrified to even try, knowing what you did to Luke, Samira laughed. I smiled, finishing my coffee. The chapter at Apex Distribution was permanently closed. The freezers were someone else's responsibility now. I had walked through the fire of corporate betrayal and come out not just unscathed, but promoted to a position where my expertise would actually be respected. It's going to be a big change, I said, looking at my two friends. But I think I'm ready for things to finally thaw out. 3 months later, I sat on the wide, wooden porch of my new house. The late afternoon sun was warm and golden, casting long, comfortable shadows across the meticulously manicured lawn. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and fresh earth, a stark, beautiful contrast to the sterile, biting cold of Freezer Unit Alpha. I had accepted Dr. Eris's offer and relocated to the new state. My new role as Director of Compliance was challenging, rewarding, and entirely free of sub-zero temperatures. I spent my days in a bright, modern office, designing the very federal protocols I used to manually enforce. I was respected, fairly compensated, and most importantly, I was listened to. Luke Green was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting sentencing. His trial had been a swift, brutal affair, entirely reliant on the airtight paper trail I had constructed. He had lost everything, his wealth, his career, and his freedom, all because he believed a warehouse worker was beneath his notice. I took a deep breath of the warm air, leaning back in my comfortable wicker chair. The ordeal was finally over.